BBC Radio Northampton. Now, cold this winter. There are those that would say, well, we haven't had a very cold winter. Well, no, compared to last year, we haven't. But last year, 362 vulnerable older people aged over 65 died in this county, and that's because of causes linked directly to the cold and indeed poor living conditions as well. They are deaths, arguably, that could and should have been prevented. Shocking stuff in this, the 21st century? Quite possibly. You might have been listening to Rob Adcock's Drive Time show 2 or 3 weeks ago. This was a story which came up then. We thought it worthwhile giving the story another bite of the cherry, as it were, because we are talking about the elderly, those who are perhaps more vulnerable, losing their lives before they naturally would otherwise do so. And because of the cold, because of the weather, because of heating costs, have a listen to this.
All right, Pops. How's Tom?
This is Tom. All you need to do is to take this little box and put it where it can easily be seen. Then, if the temperature drops to an unsafe level, Tom automatically starts to alert the elderly person that they're in danger from the cold. So, all you need to do to potentially save a life is make the phone call and ask the question.
Hello?
Hiya, Dad. Yeah, it's me. How's Tom?
Oh, he's nagging at me.
Well, he's supposed to be nagging at you. Did you put the heat on? Good man. Listen, we're thinking of popping down over this weekend. Apparently there's a cold snap coming, so we'll come and sort your house out, yeah? Yeah, Saturday morning.
Now, that's a phone conversation which is an integral part of a process of asking how Tom is. The question is, who is Tom and why Tom? Well, Tom is a box of electronics, and in fact, Tom is in the studio with us this afternoon, having been brought in by Simon Parslow, who's becoming a regular visitor to BBC Radio Northampton, but for good reason. Simon, welcome to the studio.
Hi, John.
Good to have you back on the programme. We live in an ageing population, 362 lives lost down to the cold, if you like, and to be very, I suppose, stereotypical about it, almost 1 life lost per day for last year, but through the winter period because of those really, really cold temperatures that we saw. Tom is not a person, but Tom is the starting point for a conversation that you want lots more people to have than are having right now.
Absolutely. We actually gave Tom a personality on purpose, in fact, because in a third person it's easier to blame somebody else other than who you're talking directly. If you're talking directly to your mother or your grandmother, quite often she's a bit reluctant to change and adopting change, and even admitting that might be a problem. So we came up with Tom. It's actually an acronym for Temperature Optical Monitor, but we affectionately called it Tom. We chose an old-fashioned name that was easy to relate to. In fact, when we were doing our research for Tom, we actually chose Tom and Jerry as characters that we wanted to try and base it on, because Tom's a bit mischievous, and he's a character that maybe the older generation would know. So we affectionately called him Tom, and it does give us a point of reference. You can actually refer to Tom as an individual, as a person, if you like, but it's not me, Nan, that's telling you there's a problem. It's Tom. Which is why we heard on the soundtrack to a film that can be seen on social media. It's on YouTube. That's where I took the soundtrack from myself this morning. That how's Tom question is repeated right through the film. Tom may well be a box of electronics. It's an electronic thermometer that alerts people when the temperature in their house has dropped below a certain level. But asking the question, how's Tom, is actually the key to the success of a campaign that could genuinely save lives. You want people to change their behaviour. Correct. And Tom is already doing that. We've already started distributing Tom free of charge as part of Winter Wrapped Up Northamptonshire. It's a council campaign that is backed by Age UK and some of the other major charities in the Northamptonshire area. We're already distributing these free of charge, and the feedback we're getting already is really positive. People are making changes in their behaviour. What we're trying to promote fully is that actually families should take ownership of this problem first and foremost, because it's your mother, it's your grandmother. They're vulnerable, and statistics show that over the age of 65, 90% of The deaths that you spoke about a moment ago, 362 in the Northamptonshire area, but nationally it's 31,000 people die of cold-related issues during the winter months. And the shocking statistic is that 90% of those are over 65.
This isn't necessarily about turning on the heating, though. I mean, there are plenty of older people. There's a piece in the movie, visually, you can see that fuel prices have doubled since 2004.
Absolutely.
That is a shocking statistic, but that's a separate debate that needs to be had on another occasion. The reality is lots of people find themselves poor when it comes to the costs of heating their homes. This isn't necessarily a campaign about turning on the heating. It's a campaign about bringing people together, perhaps getting people to wear more warm clothing, or at least just be aware of the fact that temperatures are falling and people therefore become more vulnerable.
At the end of the day, Tom is a thermometer. Let's not make it out to be more than it is. But what it does do, it very clearly describes temperature in a way that is easy to understand. We've all got thermometers around the home. We've probably got a wall thermostat for our central heating. We may have a barometer or thermometer in the hallway somewhere. But what does it actually mean? What does, which temperature, if we went out into the street now, John, and asked 10 people that walk past, at what temperature does it become dangerous in a living environment for any living person, but moreover the vulnerable adult, at what temperature does it become dangerous when they are putting themselves at risk? And surprisingly, 18 degrees. When you start dropping below 18 degrees, then things start to get a little bit complex.
It's very interesting you should mention that. Last year I moved into a new house, and if I'm honest with you, the boiler failed me at Easter time last year. For about 10 days I had no boiler whatsoever, so I had no hot water beyond the immersion heater. I had no heating whatsoever, and I ended up more or less living in my bedroom. Now, what was interesting to me, and I was quite prepared to do it because we were looking at the story of people being cold. I thought, well, this is going to be a learning lesson for me. Let me find out what this is like. I put 2 duvets on my bed. I went to bed wearing 3 layers of clothing, and I'm not joking, I really did do this. I found myself getting really depressed after about 3 days, and I lived in temperatures that were then about -5. It was so cold my freezer packed up because the ambient temperature in my kitchen meant that the freezer didn't have to work. It was actually colder in my kitchen than it was inside the freezer, effectively. I found myself getting very, very down in the mouth, very depressed, and I could translate that over into the elderly who perhaps don't talk to that many people either. That depression becomes grinding. You don't notice it creeping up behind you, and then your health starts to fail.
It's a good point. In fact, the elderly are the least likely to actually detect temperature change, remarkably. They're also the most at risk. As the temperature starts to drop, then the body has to work significantly harder. Cardiovascular problems, respiratory problems start to kick in as the temperature drops. In fact, the NHS, they publish startling figures. As soon as temperatures drop dramatically, the amount of heart attacks goes up significantly, and those deaths that we spoke about earlier on, a lot of those are down to heart attack issues, where the blood is thickening up and the heart is working a lot harder. It becomes problematic for the most vulnerable. So, what we're saying is, you need to be aware of your living environment, and Tom gives you that information that you need.
It also prompts that dialogue, and as we heard from the soundtrack, you've got the son, who also happened to be the presenter of the film, but you've got the son phoning his father to say, it's getting cold, what's the temperature in your place? We know it's going to get cold, we're going to come down and look after you. That's got to be good in terms of social cohesion for families. It's also got to be good in terms of alleviating pressure on doctor surgeries, the NHS, all kinds of areas.
The statistics are staggering. Okay, we've spoken about deaths, but it's not just deaths. It's hospital admissions and people that have to go and see their doctor and actually visit hospital. If you look at the total number that are affected by the cold, we're talking nearly 1 million people in one way, shape or form will be affected by the cold. 700,000 people have to visit hospital because of the cold. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to energise or mobilise a nation to actually take ownership of the issue first and foremost. So families, there are things that you can do, as you mentioned earlier on, other than just turning up the heating and spending more money on fuel, because unfortunately fuel poverty, as you said, is another debate. But there are things you can do in the home to actually make it more efficient. And even simple things like cold spots in the room can have a dramatic effect on the temperature in that immediate vicinity.
Tom, the thermometer is something that people can get hold of perhaps for their parents, for the elderly, for grandparents, whatever. The conversation, How's Tom? That's down to people. You are from How's Tom. You're backed by this campaign, which is being championed by Northampton County Council and the charities that you mentioned earlier on. How do people get hold of a Tom of their own?
Okay, we have a website. The web address is predictably howstom.co.uk. I said our whole emphasis is on asking this question. That's our whole basis of this campaign. So the website's there. It's full of information. The video that you mentioned earlier on, by the way, we're really proud of the video. We think we get the message across. So if you've got 3 minutes to spare, then please do visit our website. We were very fortunate to have that video sponsored by a social enterprise in Daventry, 13 Media Arts. Did a fantastic job on producing that for us. And take a look at the video and get involved. So the website, www.howstom.co.uk. Also, the Winter Wrapped Up Northamptonshire campaign is being spearheaded by Age UK, and they have a direct response telephone number where you can ring and not only get hold of a Tom, but you can get expert advice and guidance on what are the best measures that you can take to actually alleviate the cold and do something about it. And you will receive a free Tom in the process. The telephone number for Wrapped Up Northamptonshire is 0845 677 2220.
You can call that hotline, you can find out more. In the meantime, you can get the conversation going, you can get the dialogue going. 362 lives lost from vulnerable older people. What will be the measure of success for How's Tom? Any reduction in that number, given that we don't have a particularly cold winter right now. We could still have a cold snap, but we're a long way off 18 degrees.
We are, but you're right. Outside right now, I just took a quick look at my phone before I came in, and the temperature outside right now is 8 degrees. Your weather report just before we came on air said that it will reach freezing this evening. Currently, I'm looking at Tom, who's in the studio, and it's 21.5 degrees in here, and Tom is actually displaying the word good, which tells you in very quick and very clear terms that actually this environment is fine. So your work environment, John, is absolutely safe. You've got no worries whatsoever. Yes, you're right. The temperature isn't that cold outside. So it's not started snowing. We've seen the reports in America of the snow and the blizzards that are out there. We know that generally they sort of come our way at some point. We may get the cold snap coming our way, but it is still cold enough to actually be of danger to the most vulnerable.
And that is the point. It's about advance warning. It's about having the conversation with those who may well be vulnerable, who don't realise that actually they are in danger. We lost over 350 people last year to the cold, vulnerable older people who need not otherwise have lost their lives. It's about being neighbourly. It's about being part of the family. It's perhaps a bit of a change in society and the way we deal with the vulnerable and the elderly. But it's certainly something that we can do something about, and in the short term, which perhaps we should all be thinking about. Simon Parslow from How's Tom, thanks for coming in this afternoon. BBC Radio Northampton, time for us to head towards the news at 3 o'clock. Are you going to ask the question?
Northamptonshire,
the home of the Northampton Guildhall,
the Corby Cube,
and BBC Radio Northampton.
If you want that hotline number again, 0845 677 2220. Save lives, notwithstanding the fact it's not below freezing right now.